Hello, and welcome to another episode of Defining Your Brand podcast. Today on the podcast, we have Heather Sager. Heather helps online entrepreneurs become the go-to authority in their industry by confidently nailing their message on live and virtual stages. She's a coach, a speaker, a trainer, and a host of a top-rated podcast, The Heather Sager Show. Heather's spoken on stages around the world and personally trained hundreds of 6- and 7-figure business owners on leadership, sales, and communication. Along the way, she's learned that success is limited by your ability to articulate a vision and inspire others to take action. I'm so excited to have Heather on the podcast today, and I hope you enjoy this episode.
So yeah, we'll jump right in. For people that are listening or watching that don't know you, just tell us your name and have you done the networking elevator pitch, that kind of thing?
I hate those and I teach them. So.
I know, right? It's like that necessary evil. Yeah,
Totally.
go. So give us that, and then we'll dive into like a deeper background.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So I'm Heather Sager. I'm an online business speaking coach. So I typically work with personal brands and online course creators, service providers, helping them become more effective and dynamic speakers online. So in this interesting industry, people do a really good job writing out copy or hiring someone to write copy for their website. But when forced to actually talk about their business, it struggles, Phil. So I help people confidently talk about their business, not only in a way that attracts their ideal audience, but helps them convert into customers.
Okay. So who do you typically work with? Like who's your typical client?
Yeah. So typically course creators, service providers like copywriters or designers who have some kind of digital product or program, or coaches. So the through line between all of them is they are selling some kind of products or services online.
So is your main focus with them to help them like the verbal speaking, or is it both the written and verbal?
Not written. So I am not a writer, although I am a good writer, but it's more of I word vomit into a Google Doc and then I can figure out the writing piece. So it's definitely speaking, and it's primarily helping people speak on podcasts or on their live streams or on their Instagram stories or guest speaking in another group, but 100% all verbal.
Got it. So I'm going to go way back. So like growing up, were you a vocal child? Did you like to talk to people?
I love that, a vocal child.
I mean, that's politically correct, right?
There's two versions of the Heather of the 1980s. There's the very shy version who would hide from strangers. Mm-hmm. And then there was the very loud, dynamic sixth child who put on performances at home. So it depended on the context, but I was really shy as a kid.
I can relate to that completely. I feel like I was typically shy. I don't feel like I came out of my shell, even if you can say that. I'm still like very introverted depending on the person I'm talking to, because I have very extroverted vocal friends. And so I seem very reserved in comparison, but I also know being in business, like you got to turn it on and you got to know when's the right time to talk, when's the right time to like sit back and listen. So I can relate to that for sure.
I still relate to that, even though I speak for a living. I'm an introvert, which surprises most people. But so thinking like back in college, I was always one of the people who would be quiet and just listen. And typically somebody would call upon me, and I had great things to add to the conversation, but I hated the people that just talk to hear themselves speak, especially when they would just regurgitate or repeat what other people said. That's like two of my big pet peeves. So I'm more of I won't add anything unless I have something to add, not just speaking for the sake of speaking.
Right. So how did you, so what took you like to where you are now? Like, were you doing something before this, the speaking and the realm that you're in now? Did you have like previous jobs or experience that you did that was different, or was it similar to what you're doing now?
Yeah. Okay. Similar and different, right? Okay. It's always interesting for all of us with our careers. We look back and we're like, oh, it makes sense how like those things led to now. Yeah. But side note, shared interest. I got my career start in a photography studio. That's where I worked for like
Okay.
6 years, learning sales and art and all of that kind of stuff. So that's kind of where things started. The photography thing was like the pseudo start. So that's where I got my creative background, which has served me really well in the online space. But immediately prior to starting my online business, I worked in the medical industry for about a decade, which sounds like super, super specific and also not so fun. But the business that I worked for was a consulting kind of management firm that worked with private practice doctors. And the whole specialty around the company is we didn't work with anyone who was from the medical space. We pulled marketing experts, sales experts, finance experts, like all these people who didn't know anything about the medical space and brought their expertise to support doctors running their businesses. So my job, I was the vice president of learning and development for that company. So my job was to teach doctors and their teams how to more effectively run their practices. So we taught sales, we taught leadership, we taught team dynamic, we taught business operations. I had to learn all of these business skills and then teach it.
Yeah.
But the thing I did most was teaching from stages and conferences and virtually online. So I did a ton of speaking out of necessity and realized that I was far better at that than running a department or leading teams. Like those things, I could do them, but they exhausted me. The thing that lit me up was traveling and speaking on stages and seeing people really resonate with the message. So I did a lot of speaking and then decided, why don't I do that full time?
Yeah. So you worked, it sounds like with a lot of teams back then. Do you have any sort of team that you work with now in your current business?
Yeah. So I have a team of contractors. So I don't have any full-time employees in my business. So I have my executive assistant who's been with me, I don't know, year and a half for a hot minute. And then I have other contractors on my team, whether it's designers. I work with an incredible brand photographer. I have my podcast editor and my video editor team. So I like working with other entrepreneurs at this stage of my business. So I love not doing it totally alone.
Yeah. Do you see that? Because the first thing that I resonated with you when you said, even with your previous job, is that you're bringing people in that were not in the same field, but that kind of complemented each other that you all needed. Do you find that that's important in what you do now?
Ooh, interesting. I hadn't actually considered it like that, but yes, with a big fat asterisk. So for example, my video editor, I, as much as I can like dive my way into some pseudo program to try to figure out how to edit my videos, I'm not deeply passionate about it, nor am I very good at it. So his experience is more in digital marketing. So he comes at from that angle. But what I find really valuable for him specifically is he's actually graduated through my program, Speak Up to Level Up. So he understands my message because he's been on the receiving end of it. So it gives him an advantage where he can actually mine through my content better and pull out the sound bites. So I'm sure he'd be successful even if he wasn't familiar with my work, but it really has given us a great edge.
Yeah. So it sounds like people that are different, but still have a common kind of goal and mindset in mind that you're working on.
Yeah.
That's cool. So tell me a little bit now, then moving forward to more current, like what primarily you do public speaking, it sounds like.
Yeah. So given this last year, any public speaking that I've done has totally changed, right? So a year ago, all my contracts for speaking at events or traveling, doing consulting, all of that was canceled, as was the majority of my clients who did any kind of paid speaking. So my business looks drastically different today than it did 18 months ago, which actually has been a really big blessing because I wanted to have more of my business be online based. And I had a vision of having more online group programs versus working one-on-one. So most of my work is done through, I have a program called Speak Up to Level Up, where I coach service providers and online course creators how to create a signature talk so they can go out and speak like we're doing right now on podcasts. They can speak on guest stages and other virtual events so they can get the word out about what they do to bring back more leads and ultimately more customers in their business. So using speaking as a marketing tool, that's what I teach. So I do that primarily through my podcast, through my paid program. And then I still do work one-on-one with clients, but only a handful, because as you experienced, I'm also doing the mom thing with really young kids at home. And that requires this past year a very flexible schedule.
Absolutely. Well, and I feel like entrepreneurs in general, we're wearing lots of hats. It's not like you clock in and clock out, or you can, say you go here, you're doing it all. And I think that there's kind of that importance of knowing how to juggle all of that.
Yeah.
So
it's a constant juggle, and I don't think it looks very pretty, but you make it work. That's what being a business owner is about.
Yeah. And I feel like it's funny, just like seeing your kid walk in, there's that level of understanding, even though I don't personally have that same experience, there's an understanding that, that there's always going to be something that arises. There's always going to be something that you have to tend to right now, or, manage and, give the attention where it needs and when it needs. And I think that I feel like I've felt the entrepreneurs that I talk to and the business owners I talk to, they have this kind of grace towards other people because they know what that looks like.
I completely agree with that. And I like, it gets me thinking about how this last year especially has brought a lot of stress and pressures for anyone who has a job, let alone a business. Like there's so many things you have to handle. One of, I think, the beautiful blessings that has come out of it is people out of sheer necessity have had to show a level of vulnerability and authenticity that they never have. So they have to show up not totally put together. They have to show what their house looks like behind them. They have to manage like a little kid playing on the floor while they're taking a Zoom call, like whatever that looks like. I feel like we've developed a little bit more empathy and grace in some ways. I think in a lot of other ways, we got a long ways to go in the world. Yes. But I think we got a dose of that, especially early on in the pandemic. We got a dose of at the end of the day, we're all just trying to figure out how to make this work. And that sheer like, oh crap, we're all dealing with our own stuff. I think that's been a blessing that's come out of the last year.
I was going to say, like, how do you see that has impacted people's businesses too? Like, have you seen that impact it personally? Have you seen that impact it from the way they view other people? Have you seen that, like a direct example of, that impact of everything changes and we've got to deal with a new normal?
Two things just like immediately pop out to me when I think about that. The first is, I experienced this is you have all these ideas and you have all these responsibilities that we just put into our work day or in our lives, like all the things we're going to accomplish in a quarter or in the year or whatever. It's all in the plan, right? And I don't know if this happens to you, but like every week I have things on my to-do list that I never touch. They're like, oh, at some point I'll get to that. And then they just roll over from week to week. This last year has essentially forced out any of those things that are not a true priority. They're just not going to happen. Yeah. And I think for a lot of people, those ongoing tasks that always floated there create a lot of guilt. And this last year, it was like, screw that. Like, we just got to survive and figure out what is truly essential and focus on that. So I think we were able to cut ties a bit with that weight of the expectation of always doing more, although I think that's a constant struggle. But for me personally, that was a big piece of it, going, I cannot do all the things. I cannot have that ongoing turntable list of things always haunting me. I just have to be a little bit more stringent on what I work on. So I think prioritizing, that was a big piece. Still trying to figure that out. But from what I've seen online with a lot of business owners, the last year has forced people to do the thing that they didn't want to do, which was show their face on camera. That has been a big hurdle that I've seen for especially online business owners. They love the idea of an online scalable business. But then when they have to show their face on camera, not just their pictures, but through video, and realize that when they speak, it might not sound perfect and they might word vomit a bit on other people and they might not make sense or they might get it wrong. People shy away from that because they see other people doing it so curated online. So people have always shied away from that, whether they're scared of the camera or they're scared of what people will say about them being on camera. This year has essentially made that a non-negotiable. Like, you had to be on camera, whether it was on Zoom or actual, like if you're teaching stuff on video. Right. So it's kind of pulled the rug out from people and forced this new behavior that just is a part of online business. But the beautiful part is now people have kind of like been like, all right, it wasn't horrible. Now let me get better.
Well, and do you find the people that you, like your clients, the people that you work with, do you see that that's been their biggest struggle over the past year? Because it seems like the people that you're talking to are the ones that are needing to show up for their business. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I think a lot of people hem and haw that expression, right? They just like sit on there, like waiting, like, I know I need to jump in. Oh, I know I need to jump in. Oh, I'm supposed to do Facebook Lives, or, oh, I'm supposed to do these things. And they come from a place that somebody somewhere told them they should show their face on camera. They should do podcasts. They should, but for some reason, they're not fully committed because they're not doing it yet. So whether that's they're scared of what they look like on camera, I know I've had quite a few clients going like, oh, I don't like how I look on camera, or I want to lose weight, or I don't have the right set yet, or I'm not at a place with a stable internet connection. They come up with all these reasons. What I saw the last year is out of sheer necessity, they can no longer meet in person with people, and they had to get on camera. So they would use tools, silly things, but tools like Marco Polo, the video messaging app, just to get comfortable with what your mugshot looks like when you're talking.
Right.
Using Zoom, that's one like everybody should have bought stock in evidently last year.
Right.
That sheer necessity of doing it has helped people get over that hurdle. And you see people are no longer around, oh, should I show up? Now it's like, screw it, I'm up. I didn't even shower today. I'm showing up for my audience because I'm focused on the impact I'm making versus just jumping over the hurdle.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny that I'm a big advocate for show up the way you want your brand to be perceived, but there is sort of also this respect of, even when someone shows up that like looks a mess, I'm like, they showed up though. Like they're here. They showed up for the meeting. So it's like, at least they're here, and there's something to be said for that, because like you said, there's this feeling, I think, and a fear for a lot of people that it's too scary to even get in front of the camera at all.
Yeah. Yes. And I love that you talked that piece around like the showing up like as a hot mess. I always joke, I'm like, I'm a total hot mess today.
Right.
And I'll always get the messages of people going like, don't call yourself a hot mess. You're not a hot mess. And I'm like, no, legit, I am a hot mess and I'm okay with that. Like, because I want other people to see that. I think one thing to note, like when you talk about, I love how you define that brand piece, right? Of show up how you want people to perceive you. Yeah. I think that's really important. And what I see a lot of times people struggle with is like they show up all the time too curated or too perfect. Or then they go the extreme of going, I'm going to show up every day in my sweats with no bra and I haven't brushed my teeth yet.
Right.
And that's fine. But you have to come back to what is that sum of the brand? Like, how do you want people to perceive you? And you have to figure out what the balance is. So I always joke that my brand, I've been very intentional since I started my business. My brand is a Nordstrom's brand. Accessorized by Target, which sounds so funny because it's backwards. Most people do like Target accessorized by Nordstrom. I'm like, no. I buy my basics, my staples, the stuff that's going to be in my closet for years from Nordstrom's, but I buy the trend at Target, right? Because it's going to change next season. So when I translate that to my branding online, it means most of my Instagram like feed content is going to look higher quality. It's going to have the right aesthetic to it. It's going to have good video, but then I'm going to show up on stories in the morning with my coffee before I put on my makeup, or I might go live and not be fully put together or fully dialed in exactly what my message is. But it's not like an everyday occurrence. It's just the accessorizing here and then to remind people that it's okay to show up totally naturally. But the sum of my brand is still that higher level aesthetic and content quality. It just adds in that layer. So I think that piece, like, I don't want to breeze by that. I know you probably talk about that all the time. I just think that's so important, and it can translate to video.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it seems like this has been kind of a theme throughout the conversation. Do you find that this is kind of the conversation that you have a lot with your clients or the people that you work with? Is it the showing up aspect? What is probably, I guess, one of the most common conversations and one of the biggest problems or struggles that you see that people have?
I think a couple things that come to mind. This idea of showing up, that's number one. I think people just struggle so much with the decision of whether or not we show up. And it's one of those things, just make the decision and move on. Either you're going to show up or you're not going to show up, but making the decision or trying to strategize whether or not you're going to show up is a complete waste of time, in my opinion. Just make the decision so you can spend your effort of maximizing what you do when you show up. So where are you going to show up? How are you going to communicate? Like, what's the quality of the message? What's the outcome you want for you and your audience? Like, that's where we should have our conversation. So for me, I am what you would call a tough love coach, where I'm going to have a lot of empathy from where people are coming from. And I get the struggles of how we perceive ourselves and wondering whether or not we're going to make sense or what we look like. We all have that, right? But for me, it's like, just, you got to get into the game before you can actually start coaching on the skill. So like, let's just get in the game and talk about that. So we talk, yes, about that, but that's typically in the early stages for people around making the decision. Mm-hmm. Where I like to focus on with people is stemming off of the message that a stage is simply a platform to share your message. And what I mean by that is I think a lot of people put distance in this idea of quote unquote speaking, thinking that, oh, one day I'll speak on a big conference stage, or, oh, I'm never going to speak on a big conference stage, so this conversation is not applicable to me. And what I like to tell business owners specifically is you are on stage every single day. It's just whether or not you accept that role. You're already a speaker. You're the ambassador of your business. You're the one talking about things every single day. You're the best ambassador of your business. The question is, are you doing it with intention, or are you just kind of like drifting through, trying to get by, trying to describe as best you can how and why things work? My thought is like, if you're going to be a brand ambassador, you may as well like show up and do it with purpose and intention of a keynote speaker at a big conference, but do it on a podcast, do it on a Zoom call, do it on your sales calls. Like whenever you show up, you should have a plan and you should pack a lot of power so that you attract people, not confuse them or push them to your competition.
Today's podcast is brought to you by our sponsor, Live Well, Love Well Apparel. Live Well, Love Well Apparel is a t-shirt company, but it's not just a t-shirt company. How many times have you bought a t-shirt that you've loved, but you wear it once and then it sits in the back of your closet? How many times have you bought a shirt to support an organization, but it's not a shirt that you would ever really wear? Live Well, Love Well Apparel is changing that. This company is designing t-shirts that you'd actually want to wear. The material is soft and comfortable, and you're not going to want to take it off. Not only that, but it is a company that gives back. This company is donating a portion of the proceeds to organizations who support feeding the hungry and human trafficking. So if you want a shirt that you're actually going to want to wear while supporting organizations who help those in need, go check out Live Well, Love Well Apparel by going to lwlwapparel.com. That's lwlwapparel.com.
So it sounds like probably the simplest answer would be just show up however you can, wherever you can. Or
yes,
is it?
Yes, with a big heavy dose of have a plan for how you want to show up. So I always like my big thing is talking about you need to have purpose and intention behind why you're showing up and how you're showing up. Because just showing up for the sake of showing up is not going to get you results as a business owner. It's just you're going to show up. Like, great. So are a bajillion other people online. The question is like, what's the point of showing up and what are you going to do with your onstage moments?
So what's the questions that people can ask themselves before they show up? Like, would it be, is this the right fit, or what can be the assessment before that step?
Yeah. Okay. So you hit this piece a little bit when you talked about how do you want others to perceive you? That's the first question I always start with people is let's pretend that you just delivered insert whatever the event is. You just did a Facebook Live. You did a guest speaking event. You just did a podcast interview. Whatever situation resonates with you, ask yourself, okay, I just finished that moment. What are 3 words that I want people to use to describe me? Not my content, but to describe me. Because I think this is what's really important is people, yes, we need to put emphasis on our content, what we're talking about, but we can't discount the fact that we are part of our brand identity. So how we communicate, the way we show up with our energy, our eye contact, our body language, our tone of voice, our speed, all of those things create this image and perception from other people. So we have to start by asking, how do we want other people to describe us? That's number one, because you have to start with that to say, if I want people to describe me as engaging, personable, electrifying, informative, which that's a word I hate for people to ever describe me, is if they describe me as that, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's terrible. So you have to start with that, right? And then you have to ask the question around what is it that the audience needs and wants in this moment from me? Because I think a lot of people get caught up in their own head of going, what do I want to share? Well, it's less about what you want to share and more about who's the audience you're talking to and what do they need and want to hear. then you can kind of bring in the, okay, now what can I share to accomplish that? So it's starting with the intention of how you want to be perceived. And then 2, what does your audience actually need and want? And how can you show up and serve?
It's good. So I'm going to put you on the spot. How do you want to be perceived? What are your words that you want people to say about you?
Oh, okay. So I have a speaking mantra that I share with all of my clients and students, and I kind of break my own rules because they're not words, but I've had this, this intention and this mission for the entire time. I've been speaking on stages for 15 years. And my mantra is when I'm on a stage, I make people laugh, I make them cry, and sure as I will teach them something that'll change their life. And for me, what that represents is a couple things. One, I have kind of a sarcastic, witty sense of humor where I am not afraid to use it. I'll make fun of myself or other situations. Like I'll bring comedy into what I do. I don't think we need to take ourselves so seriously. 2, the make them cry thing, that comes from years of sharing vulnerable stories and being real with people. So I don't shy away from difficult conversations. A lot of times we talk about difficult things. And in order for people to have true, meaningful change, they have to actually face some of those insecurities and some of the challenges they have. So when I'm speaking on stage, I'll share real stuff about myself, which oftentimes evokes emotion in the audience, which is good. And then number 3, I hate fluffy presentations. I hate crappy regurgitated tips that people give. So my big mantra, like, sure, I'll teach them something that'll actually have a meaningful effect in their business, whether that's grasping onto one tip or one mindset shift. It depends on the person, what they're going to get out of it. But I always want to make sure that I pack a good punch in whatever interview or presentation I'm giving so that somebody walks away going like, wow, even if I'm not the right coach for them or my program or whatever I teach is not the right fit, I want them to be like, I took something away from that I'm going to carry with me. And if I overhear someone else saying they need help getting on podcasts or they need help down their message, I'll be like, I just heard from this gal who talks really fast, who's really energetic, who she does this. Like, you should check her out. So that's like every time I speak, those are my 3 intentions.
Nice. I love that. So I am curious for you because I feel like I see a lot of people that have, well, on social media, everybody seemingly has it all together. And like we said, everything's very well curated and we don't always get to see the mess. So I'm curious, like for you, what experiences have you had that either didn't work or you said, okay, I learned from that. Like that was wrong. That was messy. That was not approached right. That was like a personal experience for you.
I'm a big believer that if we're not actively making messes, we're not truly running a business. Like business, in my opinion, is messy. And maybe that just comes from the fact, like I'm looking around my office, I am not the home edit, like super dialed in, color coded. I mean, despite what my bookcase says, that is the one place in my office that is highly organized. Life is messy. I think business is messy. I had a nice little flop on my face, my very first webinar I ever did. I always laugh at this. When I started in the online space, for some reason, I think other people resonate with this. For some reason, when you start in the online space, regardless of what your experience is or your success before jumping into space, there's this kind of school of thought of, oh my gosh, I know nothing. Like we have to learn what funnels are and what's a nurture sequence. And wait a minute, like, how does this all work? Like, it's very confusing and we go dumb for a moment. So when I first started, I abandoned my own, like how I normally communicate and talk to people in presentations, because I'm like, oh, there's a quote unquote webinar formula that I have to follow. So I followed a big names webinar template and I'm like filled it out slide by slide and I used their script and it was terrible. It was horrible, terrible. I was like, what am I? I'm like a little parrot of this other person. It felt disgusting and gross because it was not an easy sale. I had no sales. I had I don't even remember what I was selling, but it was terrible. Just the whole experience. I remember walking away from that of going like, why does it feel so terrible? I did everything that they said to do. And then I took my own advice of going, hello, like one, you speak to people every single day. You know how to create a presentation. Your presentations have been selling for years in a different way. Why don't you just do you? So that was kind of the birth for me of the blessing of it was I had a real-time experience of like that dumb moment where we think that somebody else's template or swipe file is going to be the thing that gets us there. Authenticity, I know so many people overuse it, but authenticity and actually showing up as yourself in an electrifying way, that's going to sell every single day over somebody's template, in my opinion. Yeah. So that was like a big lesson learned. But now it's funny because I do, like, one of my top things I do with one-on-one clients is what I call webinar audits, where I fix people's broken webinars. And typically the places that we fix are the places where they've borrowed language or transitions that just sound so not like them. So it's setting them up to repel sales, not make them.
Yeah, I find it interesting because I think probably a lot of that is insecurity of, well, what I have to offer is not good enough, or it's not going to work, or what they're doing does work. So why not just copy and paste? Where I think there is, in certain situations, you can tell me your opinion, but with certain situations, I'm sure there is okay, that works. Let's follow that to a certain degree. But if you remove yourself completely from the situation and just, like you said before, just regurgitate this thing that you heard already, it's not you, it's them. And they're hearing a copy of, somebody else. And it's just this interesting balance of finding something that works, that you've seen that works, but without removing yourself completely, or just, kind of parroting somebody else.
Yeah. I think asking yourself two questions in those moments can really be clarifying. And that's if somebody else does something that you admire what they did, instead of just saying, oh, like, let me say exactly what they said, or let me model it exactly how they did. That copy and paste is not going to work because it works for their business type, their personality, their audience. Copy and paste, it doesn't work. We're all becoming little mini parrots of the big names, which everyone's turned off by. So we need to stop doing that. So two questions you have to ask is, if there's a strategy that you like, you have to say, what's the underlying goal or purpose of that strategy? Like, what's the point of, if it's on a webinar, what's the point of this section? Or what's the point of that slide? What are we trying to do here? And then you have to ask the question, how could I say it in a way that sounds like me? Or how could that work for me? So we have to translate it to a degree. So sometimes it's just saying, oh, if they had a question, but then we try to say it and we sound awkward, well, because it's not natural language that comes out of your mouth. So what are the words that you would normally say that just sound like you and not like a parrot of someone else? I think, quite frankly, a lot of times we're too lazy to do that because we would rather just write it down and move on. But just spending a little bit of time to say, how could that sound more like me? Or how would I say that if I were being totally true to me? Working through that, you're going to come up with some great language and stop doing the copy and paste model.
Yeah. It's funny. I have, as a photographer, a very visual kind of picture of what this feels like, in the sense that I have taken the same photo with the same pose with two different, they were both couples. And one looked amazing, and I was like, oh, I love that picture. I want to do it again. And I did it with this other couple, and I was like, that feels really uncomfortable and forced and weird. And even they were like, we love you, you're great, but we don't do this. And it was just this sense of
example.
Yeah, it's just the sense of like, you're trying to do what worked for someone else, and because it's not you, because it's not genuine, it's always going to show, no matter how good the setup is, no matter how good the format is, no matter how good the overall picture is. If it's not genuine to who you are, it's not gonna translate.
Oh, that's such a good example. Such a good example. It reminds me, I think I had a client once that she shared a similar, like, the point of the story, but she had the story of talking about how we can't just replicate other people's success. And she shared the story around how she admired this beautiful Instagram model, like an ad doctor, who had this really cute, you might not relate to this so much, John, but it was like a romper, like, those like onesie rompers for adults. Yeah. And she's like, oh, it'll be so cute. And she ordered it and she got it. And she laughed that it looked like a wet baby diaper on her. Like, she did not have the same body. And she's like, why did it look so pretty on them, but not on me? Yeah. I think we all could relate to that. Is we know it with clothes, but for some reason we don't think about that with photos or with our business or whatever else. So hopefully these very like illustrious visuals help people
Right.
really get that.
Yeah. Don't try to recreate it. Just make it work for you. Yeah. If I feel like if it feels disingenuous to who you are, then that's totally going to read and translate to people. They're going to see that they're like, this doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
And they may not even be able to pinpoint it. Like they may just not buy or not show up or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
But they can there's that sense of this doesn't feel honest.
Yeah. And there's a difference between this feels uncomfortable because it's new, it's unfamiliar, versus this just feels schmucky, or it feels like grossly uncomfortable. We all know that difference, but I think sometimes we're unwilling to notice that nuanced difference. There's a difference between newness and unfamiliar versus totally uncomfortable.
Right.
And I think if we listen to that a little bit more, it'll tell us, okay, so I need to do something differently.
Yeah. Which I think is good for the people that are new to what they're doing, is like, don't be discouraged to fumble through it, because there are people that I've seen that I'm like, they're new at this. They don't have the, whatever situation is, they don't have the right setup. They don't have, it's looks, intermediate, whatever you want the word may be, but because they are showing up in an authentic way and it feels true to them, you kind of are able to overlook any of that messiness or newness because it feels real.
Yeah. Yes. I love that. I think the fumbly awkward years, like that's where you should be showing up, and that's where you should be learning most. Selfishly speaking, I love those parts of my business. I still, like, sometimes on Facebook, I have a small following on Facebook. So if me doing a Facebook Live, I'm like, let me fumble all over this, because it's not like a bajillion people are going to see it. You want to fumble while your audience is still small, because here's what I find true with speaking. And this is probably with any skill. You're never going to be exceptionally wonderful at it, because it's always a work in progress. Like, I laugh because I'm a highly paid speaker. I teach people. I'm not cheap with my one-on-one services. Like, I'm doing well, but I have so much still to learn because I operate off of that constant learning growth path. I think so many entrepreneurs do. So you have to imagine with speaking, every time you speak, I always tell my members inside my program this: you should cringe when you go back and watch your videos from 6 months ago. Yeah. Cringe, not because it was embarrassing at the time, but because you've come so far. If we are not cringing at our work online every 6 months, we're not growing fast enough. And when it comes to speaking, it's a muscle you have to consistently use. I always joke, like, thinking about what you're going to say is not speaking. Like, that's not speaking, that's thinking. And we're not teaching you how to think, we're teaching you how to speak, which means open your mouth, word vomit, and start practicing it. So the more you put yourself in play, the faster you can get through that awkward fumbly and get to 6 months from now where you can laugh about that awkward fumbly. And then 6 months from then, you'll laugh again.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we should just, I think that there's this sense of feeling like we should make it, like we've arrived. But the reality is that, like you said, they're always, because for me, and I always think of like my business, I'll learn a technique or I'll learn something new, and then I will, learn something new in a few months, and I'll look back and I'll think, man, I overused that, or I overdid it, or whatever it may be. And how we are is always going to be in relation to how we did show up. So like, if that relatively is not better all the time, then if you ever feel like, oh, I made it, and then you probably haven't been growing at a fast enough rate, going forward.
Yeah. I agree with that so much. I think it's that point when we feel like we've made it, or we're doing that perfect thing. As you were saying that, it reminded me, I don't know the quote perfectly, but Brennan Burchard talks about, and it always like, he talks about, I don't think people are afraid of failing online. We're afraid of being seen as starting small. And every time I think about like, oh, that's totally it, is I think everybody wants to look like they're quote unquote Instagram famous, or that they're the whoever the big name of the world is. Everybody wants to be seen at how they picture themselves showing up in a few years. But what we're truly scared of is being seen as starting small. And I say, if you resonate with that at all, look at this as such a beautiful opportunity. Start small. Start small where the pond is tiny, because then you have a nice little playground with no other kids on it to play, to mess up, to try to figure out how to use the monkey bars or go backwards down the slide or whatever crazy stuff you want to do. Do it now, so that by the time you are in the more quote unquote popular ponds, or you have more people watching, well, then you feel more comfortable with how you show up. You feel more confident in your message or your voice or your set or your camera or whatever else. Give yourself the grace of time while you're small, and honor that as a good thing. Not that you're behind, or not that you're failing, or not that you're good enough. It just is where you are, and you have so much farther to go, but honor that place, because it's a fun pond to play in.
Yeah, for sure. I'm thinking about the message that maybe people need to hear right now in this time where, because even though, things are kind of easing up, letting up, going back to normal, whatever that may be, I do think that this past year is going to affect a lot of how we do business and how we interact and speak and communicate. What would you have to say for people that may be feeling a little intimidated by the current circumstances?
There are a lot of opportunities now. There are a lot of opportunities that are coming. There's always going to be opportunities to share your message. You have to make a decision right now. Is what I'm building something that I'm in for the long haul? Is this something that I'm truly passionate about? And if so, how serious am I? How committed am I to actually getting the message out there? Because I think we all like to think we're the field of dreams with our business, that if we build it, the people will come, the sales will come, the clients will come. And even though we know that's not true, that's kind of how we operate. We're like, oh, if I put my freebie out in the world, or if I get my landing page up, then it's all going to roll in. And that's just not true. And personally, I'm not like a huge, let me go out and spend a bunch of money on Facebook ads until I actually make sure things are converting and working. So I see speaking on stages as the fastest, most fun, and testable way to get your message out there, to find your people and find what your message actually is. So I think everyone should, instead of looking at it as a scary thing, going, what an awesome testing ground to try saying things out loud, to try figure out who I'm going to serve, how those messages are going to work. Use that as an opportunity to test and play and have fun with it. But I think the most important thing for people to remember is, even though your experience and expertise is probably broad, you probably know a lot of things and you have a lot of things you want to share, look ahead at the opportunity to say, how can I get more laser focused with my message? So that way, when I show up on different kinds of stages, when I show up online, there's an echo, meaning you're always saying similar things. So people start to understand and remember you for your message, where your message doesn't just go out there and get lost in a sea of other people who talk about similar things. How can your message be tight, consistent, and always be hammering on the same things so that you build a brand with your message? For me personally, that means I think everybody should have a signature talk that they can pull from over and over again. But I think that's one of the things people really need to work on, is tighten up their message so that it's always beating on the same drum, so they can be known for one thing, not forgotten because they spoke on a lot of things.
Awesome. I love that. Well, what do you have? Do you have anything coming up in the future, new things that you're working on? Or
I always have guest speaking going on. I always have things going on, right? Because I practice what I preach. I'm always speaking and testing these things all the time. So doing interviews like this are so fun. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
I think two things. If people are looking to like rock out, who says that? I but go like, okay, I'm interested in this. I want to figure out, how do I get more impactful with my voice? How do I actually pay attention to this as a marketing tool? My favorite place to hang out. I have new episodes hit on my podcast at least once, if not twice a week. That's on the Heather Sager Show, available on any podcast, just like where you're listening here. So if you're listening here, you probably love podcasts. So that's where I like to hang out, is on my show. So that'd be the best place to go.
Awesome. Well, where else can people find you if they want to follow you and kind of follow your journey?
Yeah. So Instagram is where I hang out again,
right.
like a lot of people. So I'm on Instagram stories every single day. So I'm over there. I'm at the Heather Sager. So come hang out. And if anybody's looking at, if I struck a chord with the signature talk piece where you're like, oh, how do I really dial in my messaging and start speaking with a strategy to have people start knowing me? Check out my latest free training. I'm updating it at least every couple months. So if you go to heathersager.com/free, you can get your hands on my latest free training where I'll teach you how to grow your business through speaking, or how to become more confident when you're speaking behind a microphone or a camera, whatever that looks like. We rotate those out every couple months to make sure you have the tools to be successful sharing your message.
Awesome. And we'll make sure to link all of that below. So if people want to kind of follow up with that, they can click on that and see what you're up to.
I appreciate that so much.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Heather. I appreciate all of the tons of insight that you gave all of us. And I know that especially right now is where a lot of people are starting businesses and they're in a situation where they have to be on camera, that I think that you brought a lot of great points about how we can show up for our own businesses. So I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. You're a great interviewer. This is a fun conversation. Your audience is lucky for you to come at things from different angles and perspectives with really thoughtful questions. I think it's really easy to phone it in on podcasts, and you do a really good job making this as interesting as possible for people.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate that.